All right, Bill, I think we can get started.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Lori. Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Robert from Spy Pond Partners. Uh, we'll, you've signed up today for a webinar on a project that was performed for Federal Highway Administration, and this is the first of two planned webinars on the project. So the title of today's webinar is Don't Let Financial Uncertainty Derail Your TAMP, Strategies for Identifying and Managing Financial Risks. And this webinar is motivated by the idea that transportation agencies' ability to manage their systems can be impacted by unexpected, unplanned events, most notably revenue disruptions or natural hazards or other kinds of events. Managing uncertainty through risk management is a really important part uh, of modern leadership practices and a key component in developing a transportation asset management plan, or TAM. Federal Highway Administration initiated a project to examine financial and organizational risk and strategies for managing these risks as part of asset management. Through this project, several resources were developed to illustrate strategies for managing risk. And the two webinars that first of which we're having today are part of the outputs of the project. So today we'll focus specifically on how agencies can manage financial risk. Next slide. So before we get started, I just wanted to put up this disclaimer and ask everybody to read it. It basically lays out that the contents of this document or of this webinar don't have the force and effect of law. They're not meant to bind anybody. And it was created by FHWA, but also by outside entities. So we've got folks presenting from states, and the information they present doesn't represent FHWA's views, it represents their own views. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I said, there's really two webinars in this mini series. The first is today's on financial risk, and on June 25th, you'll want to be sure to come back for the second webinar on effective organizational risk management. Okay, and so this slide lists the learning outcomes for the two webinars. They are to identify the types of financial and organizational risks that impact asset management planning, describe impacts that financial and organizational risks can have on investment strategies for a TAMP, and also compare different approaches for managing financial and organizational risks. And to do that, we're providing examples and having different states present on their approaches. So for this first webinar, I'll provide this quick overview of the FHWA project. We'll talk about common financial risks and strategies for managing those risks, and then give examples. We have presenters from Michigan DOT and Florida DOT who will present on strategies their agencies have used. And we'll have questions and answers a little bit after each of our state presentations. Okay, next slide. So this slide just provides an overview of the FHWA project. So recognizing that financial risk can significantly impact agencies' ability to implement their TAMPs. Through this project, FHWA sought to identify examples that show how different DOTs have made decisions in response to consideration of revenue streams and the uncertainty in those revenue streams. The results from those examples were incorporated in case studies and in a summary report that's available online that highlights how these practices were implemented, what changes they had or maybe expected to have on TAMP investments. Okay, next slide. And this slide just lists some of the different resources available. Certainly encourage you to take a look at the products that were developed through this project. All of them are available on FHWA's asset management site, and you can see the link on the slide. There's documents that detail these case studies that we'll be talking about today on financial risks, documents on organizational risks, which would be the focus of the next webinar, and a summary report talking about how to identify and manage financial risks in TAM. Okay, next slide. So next couple of slides just provide a summary of the common financial risks and different strategies for managing financial risks, sort of a preview of what's in the report. So here we've got three basic common financial risks. One important one is just uncertainty in future revenue. So this includes challenges associated with establishing your federal funding, as well as availability of state matching funds and uncertainty about other funds besides the federal funds and the matching funds. And a TAMP needs to include uncertainty associated with possible cuts in funding, drops in fuel tax revenue, changes in bond ratings. These are all, examples that different agencies have put in their TAMPs that get at this risk. The second type of financial risk is just specifically uncertainty in agency costs, such as fluctuations in the cost of labor and material. So, first we're looking at the revenue side, next we're looking at the cost side. And the final category of financial risk is just a grab bag of other risks, such as increases in the number of assets that have to be managed, which impacts financial resources that are required, agencies' ability or inability to have projects available to leverage any increases in funding, and reductions in funding that an agency could suffer as a result of changing climate, like a really tough winter, for example, where there was increased snow removal costs, or other kinds of changes that impact the amount of money that an agency needs. So these are all, like I say, risks that were noted in different agencies' TAMPs in the past. Okay, so then the next couple slides talks about strategies for managing financial risk. And really there's 4 strategies that are highlighted in the materials for the project. Strategy 1 is basically monitoring and making adjustments in response to monitoring. And in the work on the project, we found that at least 16 states discussed monitoring financial parameters in this fashion. So typically what an agency might track would be revenue trends, such as fuel tax revenues, and cost trends, such as construction prices at a national or state level, or costs for key important materials, cost of asphalt, cost of steel, and so forth. The variation in material pricing can have a really big impact on project costs, so it certainly makes sense to monitor these things over time. The second strategy is to improve forecasting and develop scenarios of future revenues. And this is intended to help establish the long-term impacts under different situations and evaluate those. This approach recognizes uncertainty in planning, but provides agencies the opportunity to assess potential impacts that changes in traffic growth, asset deterioration rates, and revenue estimates might have on future outcomes. Strategy 3 is to try to hedge financial risks by making sure that there is a good and steady investment in asset preservation. So in strategy 3, an agency offsets revenue fluctuations by committing to an adequate level of investment in preservation activities, and makes this commitment prior to investment in other activities. So several state DOTs use life cycle planning portion of their TAMPs to demonstrate the benefit of an ongoing proactive investment in preservation, and incorporated this commitment to preservation as a way of mitigating risk in the TAMP. The fourth strategy is exploring alternate revenue sources. And this last strategy might not initially be obvious to some transportation agencies, but it's certainly a way to address financial uncertainty. And so this might include having a plan in place to increase vehicle registration fees, to issue bonds, or shift funds between programs or areas. We did find examples of all four of these strategies in performing the research for FHWA. Next slide. So this slide simply lists the same risks and then shows where we saw some examples, or where we highlight examples in the report. So for strategy one, Michigan and Florida DOT, both presenting today, had different approaches for monitoring. In strategy two, we have examples from Texas and Connecticut of forecasting and scenario development. For the commitment in asset preservation, strategy three, Florida DOT demonstrated this. They'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And strategy four, we had an example from Pennsylvania DOT illustrating this strategy. Okay, next slide. So for the remainder of today's webinar, you'll be hearing from presenters from two states. So first we'll have Lina Chapman and Brad Charlo present from Michigan DOT, and they'll be followed by Daniel Cashin from Florida DOT. In each case, they'll present on the case study from their perspective that we had in the FHWA document. First, I'd like to introduce Lina and Brad. So Lina is the supervisor of program development unit in the Bureau of Transportation Planning at Michigan DOT. Her staff of 6 is responsible for long-range revenue forecasting, pavement condition forecasting, monitoring and reporting, coordinating the annual highway call for projects process that Michigan DOT uses, and generating the annual 5-year transportation program. This program communicates the department's investment strategy in selected projects to the public and stakeholders. Lina has been at MDOT for 15 years and has managed products such as the Michigan Freight Plan, 5-year transportation program, and the TAMP. She's worked in economic development and policy analysis with MDOT as well. She has a bachelor's in urban and regional planning from Michigan State. Brad has been with Michigan DOT for over 20 years. He began at the agency as a student assistant in 2002, and he became a full-time transportation planner in 2003. In his time with MDOT, Brad has served as a transportation planner in support of the call for projects process, a travel demand model, a congestion management specialist, project manager of 2 long-range transportation plans. Also, he's been a coordinator of the Technical Transportation Committee and a supervisor of the Urban Travel Analysis Unit within the statewide Transportation Planning Division. Right now, he's the Asset Management Section Manager within the Asset Management and Policy Division. Brad has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Michigan State, and he's been certified with the American Institute of Certified Planners since 2020. So with that, I'll turn things over to Lina and Brad.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be with you all today. I'm here to talk with you about how the Michigan DOT uses asset preservation as a guiding principle for managing financial risks. So hopefully I can cover some of these topics. First up, a quick overview of our great state of Michigan. MDOT divides the state up into 7 regions, and we are responsible for nearly 28,000 lane miles of pavement and 4,500 bridges. And our population is roughly 10 million, and annually we see about 124 million visitors come to the state of Michigan. Next slide. So I'm going to talk with you about the revenue estimating and cost monitoring processes that we have at MDOT and what we consider during the investment strategy development process for our highway capital program, as well as how we did this for the 2022 Transportation Asset Management Plan. And then Brad is going to talk about the ways that we communicate with our stakeholders and some current activities we have that support all of this work. So really, to begin our asset management process, first we need to know what revenues are expected to be received into the Michigan Transportation Fund, and specifically to MDOT for use on the Highway Capital Program via the State Trunk Line Fund. So revenues are primarily coming in from vehicle registration fees and motor fuel taxes, and they make up about 75% of the receipts into the MTF for the Michigan Transportation Fund. Starting in 2022, the Michigan State Legislature added an inflationary adjustment to the gas tax, which is actually tied to the U.S. Consumer Price Index with a 5% inflationary cap, which we hit in 23 and 24. So really that's helped guard against some of the inflation that we've experienced over these past few years. And then with our registration fees, we have an additional electric vehicle surcharge that was implemented with the 2015 revenue package that went into effect on January 1st of 2017. And it has a base set of about $30 for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle and $100 for a full electric vehicle, both under 8,000 pounds. And this structure is actually adjusts as the gas tax increases with inflation. So those are both really good things that we had added back in 2015. Also, that revenue package initiated an income tax redirect, as we call it, which is basically an earmark of about $600 million starting in fiscal year 2019 and beyond. That makes up another 15% of that MTF pie. And then our Michigan Transportation Fund also receives 35% of the total tax collections on marijuana sales in the state, which adds another 2% to our total. So we have some other state restricted funds that go into other things like there's some auto-related sales tax for public transportation, and there's other various earmarks for things like aeronautics and our Transportation Economic Development Fund, but that's really the bulk of the revenues that are coming in. Next slide. So after the funds are deposited into the Michigan Transportation Fund, we have 10% that goes directly to our Comprehensive Transportation Fund for public transit. And then from there, we divvy up the funds that are remaining, that 90%, to the counties, cities, and villages, and MDOT according to a distribution formula that is set in Public Act 51 of 1951. So it's been with us a long time, many changes over the years. But that's really where MDOT and the counties each receive 39% of that pot, that MTF pot, and then the remainder going to the cities and villages. So with MDOT's amount deposited into the State Trunk Line Fund, then we kind of start to do our work of subtracting known and estimated debt service and other non-capital uses that we know will be coming off the top of that pot before we are able to get to the number that we can actually invest in the Highway Capital Program. And then, you know, you can move, but a couple more things on this one. So the revenue increases and the measures that were put into place to help kind of prevent the inflationary deterioration of our revenues have not really kept pace with the actual inflation that we've experienced, resulting in some over-programming. But some of the things that we have done recently, we had to manage our program by making some necessary cuts to our highway program in future fiscal years. So for the fiscal year 29, and we had to cut our program by about $400 million. We also use a finance technique called advanced construct in order to be able to kind of move federal obligation authority where we need it to be. And also we directed our program and system managers to adjust their engineers' estimates on projects by as much as 20% across the state during these years when inflation has really just been hitting everyone really hard. So that's one of the few ways that we've been able to try to adjust and kind of right size the estimates that we have out there. Another thing that we did, we have been advocating for additional state funds that were actually added to the governor's recommended budget for fiscal year 25 to address a state fund shortfall that we have to match federal aid due to increases in debt service on some of the bond financing that we were able to do. So hopefully that goes through. Otherwise, we'll have to make additional decisions about where our resources are going to go. And then kind of a little bit more here, to develop our future year forecast, we monitor trends in the receipts from all of these sources. So fuel purchases, registrations, adjustments to the fuel tax rate that are expected in the future. And we put all of those numbers into a long-range revenue model and then generate future year estimates based on 90% of the past 10 to 20 years of revenue collections that we've actually received, preferring to keep it as conservative as possible, knowing that, you know, there's a lot of things that could change in the future. So we want to be conservative, really. And then twice a year, we meet with our Bureau of Finance and the Department of Treasury to establish the reasonability of our forecasts. We prepare for a biannual revenue consensus meeting where we're really focused on the upcoming 3 years of expected revenue collections kind of statewide. And then on the planning side, you know, our financial forecasts do need to go out much further than 3 years as we are producing estimates for like our state long-range plan, TAMP, 5-year program, and for our annual highway call for projects when we're preparing to add another year. So this year, we're actually calling for 2030 jobs for that program. So now next slide. So back in 1997, 98, we have our State Transportation Commission. They set for us these aspirational pavement and bridge goals that were also affirmed in our state long-range plan. And we were able to achieve those goals in the 10-year time period that was set for us by focusing on lower cost fixes, such as like resurfacing or minor rehabs. You know, so we hit that goal, but really there was still a backlog of other major work that needed to be done that kind of has continued to accumulate over the years. So at that same time, we also established the use of a program called the Road Quality Forecasting System, which allows us to estimate future pavement condition and helps to inform our asset management strategy so we can really put forward the strategic direction that we need to reach these aspirational goals through the call. So later on in 2012, MDOT stratified its network. So it went from being interstate, non-interstate to being a 4-tiered structure to further balance our limited financial resources, with Tier 1 interstates becoming a major focus due to no more than 5% for federal requirement that came on later after all this was in place. So each region's road program through the call, our subcommittees set an investment percentage target for each of those tiers, those 4 tiers, and encourage a mix of fixes to improve system condition based on what's really best for the region and what projects I think need to go forward based on the strategy that they develop. We establish our road program targets to each region, and they're allocated based on weighted factors by cost, condition, and usage by TAMP tier. There's some other factors that go into all of that, but that's kind of the overarching weights. And then from there, our regions go out and create their long-term strategy on the pavement side to meet the strategic direction that we've set to hit these aspirational goals. And they really analyze their historic data, recently collected data. They do van tours and forecast their system to determine the investment needed in each tier, and ultimately which projects to select for further subcommittee review. One of the other things that we've added and we've added to our call over the last couple of years is a supplemental call for projects where we're asking for submittal of projects that would be able to be constructed quickly, would be kind of ready to go if additional funding were to come available. So all those jobs get programmed on our database as draft, and then if additional resources are available or if we need to do some shifts around, we've got a set of projects ready to go. So then once those jobs are programmed and approved through the call process, they're packaged up and presented in our 5-year program. And we have public comment and a presentation to our State Transportation Commission and eventual submittal to the state legislature for that one. And then we meet on a monthly basis, planning and finance staff. We call it the revenue and use team. And we focus on reviewing constraint for the 5-year program time period. And then this past year, we have actually expanded our conversations to include 10 years of planning estimates to further help manage the overprogramming that we have currently on the database and out there planned work, and then to discuss any future major program needs that we need to accommodate in the future years that we have for the program. And really, when we're considering our investment strategy, pavement and bridge condition are the primary drivers, asset condition are primary drivers for where our resources go, because we have a basic requirement. We are considering other needs beyond that. And if revenues are available, we are able to adjust the program. But these last few years have been especially challenging to do that while maintaining financial constraints. So we haven't been able to add any program in a little while, but hopefully through some of these measures that I've talked about today, we'll be able to have a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel coming up in 2030, 2031 for additional program to be added. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the forecasting systems that we use here at MDOT. They're really all proprietary and in-house systems. Our road quality forecasting system uses the remaining service life measure and it has a deterioration factored into that. And it also includes programmed work and the latest cost per lane mile data coming in from the last year of projects to make sure that our cost projections are accurate. On the local side, the pavement condition forecasting system uses PASER, or the Pavement Surface Evaluation Rating Scale, really on the, like I mentioned, on the local side. And then our bridge condition forecasting system uses current bridge condition information from the National Bridge Inventory. And so through the use of these tools, we really use them heavily to determine how much we need to maintain MDOT-owned pavements and bridges to that desired state of good repair, which currently is estimated at about $2.4 billion of additional need on top of what we are currently able to invest. So the number is really quite staggering, but we use this information in the charts that we produce from these systems in order to communicate that need that we have in order to get additional revenue for the program. We also use this information to help us determine where to make shifts in our program investment. So for example, for fiscal years 29 and 30, we used some forecasting models to identify and direct a shift of $75 million from our road rehab and reconstruct program, or kind of our major projects, into our capital preventive maintenance program in order to help kind of slow the deterioration on the trunk line system by being able to hit more lane miles, lower cost fixes. So those are some of the other ways that we try to manage some of the risk that we see out there in the future by constantly shifting our program and where our investments go. And identification of alternative strategies, kind of just mentioned one, but at the time that we created the 2022 TAMP, we evaluated 4 alternative scenarios. So there's the to achieve the national minimum condition level that no more than 5% pavements in poor condition and bridges in poor condition. The preserve current condition scenario, to achieve the desired state of good repair, which is our aspirational State Transportation Commission goal, and then a constrained scenario. You'd think that the gaps between each of these are more detailed in the TAMP, and you can find a lot more information in there about that. It actually has some more updated tables since the case study actually came out just right around the same time that our TAMP was getting published. So there's more information about how we did that in that TAMP. But really each one evaluated, condition, the goals, the cost, the needed, and the investment needed to get there. So since our investment strategy must be fiscally constrained overall, it unfortunately does result in declining asset condition over time, as our current financial resources just aren't enough to maintain our system condition at the level that we would like it to be maintained. Plus with inflationary pressures haven't been enough to keep pace with the cost of things out there. So we're always looking for new and creative ways to communicate our state's infrastructure investment needs. But we will definitely continue to use asset management as the foundation for our decision-making, knowing that these projects really aren't going to cost any less in the future. So really the time is now to find a better way to adequately fund our transportation system. And I think at this point, Brad's actually going to talk about some of the things that we have ongoing here at MDOT that are putting us in the right position to be able to make some even better decisions in the future. So go ahead, Brad. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into the communication approaches, one of the things we want to highlight here, obviously as part of the development of the TAMP, we have to cover the entire national highway system, which includes roads that are not owned by MDOT but are owned by some of our local agencies. In 2002, an amendment to Public Act 51 of 1951 required the creation of the Transportation Asset Management Council. And so in Michigan, we have 617 agencies.
I don't know, do we need to specify that these attachments are they're not attachments to the STIP itself?
think we have someone, okay, so I was just gonna go say, we have 617 agencies in the state of Michigan responsible for owning, operating, and maintaining roads and bridges in the state. And so coordination of a council was needed in order to help coordinate all those activities statewide. And so one of the things, so this council was formed in 2002 to help coordinate. They're required each year to develop an annual report showing the current conditions and projected forecasts of our roads and bridges. And we use PASER, as we mentioned, to calculate the entire federal aid system, as well as they've taken efforts to move into the non-federal aid system as well. In 2018, another amendment to Act 51 came into play where they started requiring all local agencies that had more than 100 certified miles of roads to have an asset management plan as well. And within those, they have to be updated every 3 years. So there's now 123 agencies that have to develop local TAMPs each year. Some of the requirements that they look to in terms of those is that they need to include an asset inventory, performance goals, a risk of failure analysis, anticipated revenues and expenses, performance outcomes, a description of any of the plans of the asset owners to coordinate with other entities nearby, a proof of acceptance, and a multi-year program has to be included as in all of those asset management plans. And it's up to our staff here to review those and ensure that those criteria are incorporated in. On the next slide, we'll talk about the different communication approaches that we currently do to help promote this and all of the different activities. First of all, ongoing public engagement is continuous for the department. We have our Facebook, Instagram pages, and also about once every week or two, there is a talking transportation podcast through Michigan that our Office Communications facilitates. And they talk about different hot topics going on at the time and share information on what's going on. We do have other communications that come out through our 5-year transportation program annually. We have an highway accomplishments report that comes out each year. We have a fast fact sheet, all kinds of information that show the current state of affairs as well as dashboards. As I mentioned with the Asset Management Council, we do have the annual report that comes out each year. We also have an investment reporting tool which lays out all of the investments and projects that are incorporated in from all agencies doing road and bridge projects. We have our state long-range transportation plan known as Michigan Mobility 2045 that was adopted in November of 2021. Within that document, it lists a vision, goals, objectives, strategies, and as well as a system performance report and a strategic multimodal corridors report that and discusses the performance and condition of our assets. The governor's dashboard also is out there that lists some key performance indicators that we try to achieve and adhere by. On the next slide here, we'll talk a little bit more about where are we going and some of the, first, before we get there, I'll talk about the asset management process. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so one of the things that we're also working towards right now is moving into the next generation of asset management, making it more integrated between assets. And so we adopted this asset management vision several years ago to integrate asset management practices and systems into our everyday business operations and decisions to provide the desired level of service in a sustainable way while managing risk at the lowest life cycle cost. And so one of the initiatives we're looking at right now is the development of an enterprise asset management system and following an effort known as Michigan Transportation Asset Management, or MITAM. And what we're doing, this is a strategic effort to bring asset management to all business areas of the department, as well as to look at making sure we're accounting for doing asset management across all of our different asset areas. And they established about 3 or 4 years ago an asset steering committee that serves as kind of the policy board as we move forward in the development of our asset management vision. And so my role is to kind of report to that board and give updates as we're moving along there. On the next slide here, we're going to talk about some of the current activities that we're doing. We just recently completed a national best practices scan that was done within the department through our governor's office. And some of the things that were highlighted within that was we were looking into potentially modifying our investment strategies and program development. And we focus on 3 areas and 3 pots. A state of good repair, which focuses on the asset management approach to maintaining our existing assets. Looking at modernization as a second pot, which goes above and beyond those normal reconstruction rehabilitation projects, and then major projects which may require congressional and state legislative assistance because they go way beyond our standard even modernization of our existing system. And so that has been ongoing as we've gone forward with this effort, and the findings of that will be further incorporated into MDOT strategic plan, which has been under development for the last couple of years to support our new mission of serving and connecting people, the communities, and the economy through transportation. Other efforts that are ongoing right now, and this is just a sample of them, but there are so many out there, like that would probably take an hour just listening to each of them. But overall, we're in a research project looking at multi-objective decision analysis research that's being led out of Linus' shop, where we're looking at opportunities to how do we do more integrated asset management investment decisions. The project identification tool has been looking at ways to enhance our pavement prioritization. We have a corridor planning pilot that's going on along our I-75 corridor right now. Our ancillary structures program has been developed and has been moving forward pretty substantially. And it's just a recent NCHRP report came out highlighting some of the activities there that Michigan's done and their development of their ancillary structures program. Culverts being a big piece of that, both within MDOT and then also with the Asset Management Council in terms of collection of culverts has been a big emphasis there. And then we're currently right now leading the effort and going through a TAM data assessment, looking at 12 different asset areas across the department, seeing where we're at today and trying to determine what are the next steps that are going to be needed to help us move in the direction of MyTAM for an enterprise asset management system. So we're about a third of the way through that effort right now and hope to complete that by the end of the calendar year. And so one final thing I want to highlight in terms of what we're currently working on as well is Michigan's been involved. It was directed by our legislature to apply for a federal road usage charge pilot. And so we submitted a grant application to the Strategic Innovation for Revenue Collection Program to evaluate feasibility to implement road user charges in Michigan, and also how we could factor that into our long-range revenue modeling. So a lot of activity is going on here currently when it comes to promoting and implementing what came out of this report that we're talking about today, as well as our TAMP. And we know that we're getting just about ready to start the next iteration of the TAMP here over the next year, since we know that's due in the summer of 2026. Our next slide kind of just highlights the results as we look at. As we know, reduce funding uncertainty through forecasting and modeling. We're continuing to work towards ways to address that, and revenue forecasting to project those future funds, and continuing to make ongoing adjustments as we monitor the program. We're continually working to improve the credibility of our efforts here, and reporting and accountability and transparency, and building that trust within our state legislature. And we continue to make a strong focus on the state of good repair and asset management as core strategies to promote not only the department's mission, vision, and values, but our state long-range plan and the goals coming out of our state transportation commission. And so with that, we'd be happy to take some questions if we have a few minutes here. And
yeah, thanks very much, Brad. We do have a few minutes for questions. I see there's a couple in chat. One that I wanted to pose to you and Lina was just the revenue uncertainty associated with the gas tax and the transition to electric vehicles. Lina, you described how you estimate the funds in the in the state trunk line fund. For this most recent iteration, how did you address, kind of changing vehicle fleets and the impact on funding that might have?
Yeah, that's a good question. At this point in time, the number of electric vehicles registered in the state of Michigan just isn't sufficient to have a significant impact on our revenue projections. So we're just kind of keeping an eye on it right now, and basically kind of looking at the numbers of registrations over the past several years and trying to figure out at what point in time do we need to make some changes to our revenue, our long-range revenue model in order to factor those in. But right now they're not necessarily, they're just not big enough numbers to make a big impact. The good thing is that we do have that additional fee on those vehicles, so it's kind of helping to balance out the loss in fuel tax revenue. So that's actually working as well, or even better than expected. So we're very fortunate to have that here. But yeah, that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, how to modernize our model in order to take into consideration those types of things for the future, because we know they'll be growing. So.
Right. Okay, so there's a couple of questions in the chat. Brian Colley asked, does Michigan DOT have one source of truth that is used in developing the asset management plan, so that one source of data may be used to optimize the design, construction, operations, and maintenance decisions? So sort of a general question, what do you base your data for the asset management plan on?
I would say that no, we don't have a single source of truth. If you do, I'm very impressed and I'd like to read your your summary, but no, I mean, we really are pulling from several different systems that we have. We have pavement system, bridge system, the data in kind of different places. I think that's really what Brad and his team are working on, to try to get us to a place where we have a single system where all that asset data can be located. In terms of construction operations and maintenance decisions, I think that might be like a next level. So Brad, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, each of these areas have their own management system that they're currently using to make decisions. We did talk about in our presentation, even prior to the federal measures for pavement, we had two separate remaining service life and Pazer that we were using, and both of those tell slightly different stories. In a perfect world, we'd have everyone using one metric, but for the local governments, Pazer is a much simpler, straightforward way to go out there and collect data, and especially for these smaller agencies with not a lot of resources. And it tells us a quick story every year to be able to go out there and do that. But for MDOT, we need something a little more substantial in terms of being able to look at the entire health of and history of the pavement in general. And so remaining service life has served that story. But now with the PCM and the IRI that we have through the federal measures, we're looking at how do we further integrate all those together. So right now, it's a little bit of a challenge because we have a lot of different agencies trying to understand. We have the County Road Association looking at the interest on the county system. We have the state, we have our Michigan Municipal League looking at the cities and villages. And so there's just a lot out there that we had to coordinate, and the TAMP does the best that they can, along with our state long range plan, to bring all that together.
Okay, we also had a question from Larry Red. Larry's asked about what analysis have you performed of root causes of financial uncertainties and how you identify them and their impacts. Is there a discovery process in place or needed to identify these unknowns?
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a good response to this question. When I think about financial uncertainty, I think the biggest thing that for me is future revenue collections and fund availability. I mean, we know that the resources that we are generating at the state and national level are just insufficient to meet the needs that we have. And so we kind of know really what one of the major root causes is, and just try to do the best we can with the resources that we have and shift our program around as needed. And, there's some things that are emergencies and must get done, and some stuff that we'd love to do just can't get done, so there's never going to be enough money, it seems like. But that's the root cause that comes to mind for me. It's just we know how much money we need. We just don't have the revenues to kind of back it up, even just for basic asset management. So, it's a continual challenge for sure.
They're uncertain about the funding, but certain that it's never going to be quite enough.
Right.
Well, and just
Yes.
the fact that inflation has been going so much over the roof over the last several years. And we appreciate the discretionary grant program when it comes to different opportunities for projects, but it's less reliance on formula funds has made it increasingly difficult to understand what our future revenues are as well, because those discretionary grants are not definitive. So we
Right,
have to,
inherently uncertain, yeah.
so that contributes there to those as well.
Well, thanks very much. Those are the only questions we got so far, but if folks have additional questions, please enter them in chat and we'll have a little bit more time after our next presentation for those. So our second case study will be on Florida DOT, and the presenter will be Dan Cashin. Dan is the Finance Program and Resource Allocation Manager within the Office of Work Program and Budget at Florida DOT. Dan has over 30 years of experience with the agency. He manages the unit that's responsible for projecting state transportation revenues, making fund allocations and program targets in accordance with state and federal law, and producing the program and resource plan, which is a document that provides planned commitment levels for each of the department's programs. Also, his unit develops the department's finance plans, ensuring planned expenditures for projects in the 5-year work program are balanced with anticipated revenues. Dan makes recommendations to department leadership to ensure resource allocation adjustments and bonding levels are appropriate to accomplish the program and policy objectives of the department. And Dan holds a master's degree in public administration from Florida State University. In his work there, he emphasized the policy analysis and valuation methods. So with that, I'll turn things over to Dan to present on Florida DOT's approach.
Thank you, Bill, and greetings, everybody. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. I'm here to talk with you about managing financial risks, and I'll focus on monitoring revenue and costs, as well as investments and asset preservation. Just a little bit of background on Florida and the Florida Department of Transportation. We have a population of over 22 million residents. We receive over 135 million visitors annually, and we have a decentralized department with 7 districts, and we also have a turnpike enterprise that manages the turnpike system. Our state highway system has over 45,000 lane miles, and we have over 7,000 bridges. We also inspect an additional 5,000 other bridges, which are the responsibility of local governments. Next slide, please. Performance management is a key component of our investments. There are 3 principles of our financial planning approach. Performance management principles are in place to ensure accountability. Available fund use is linked to our mission and our processes, and we fund preservation and safety first. We have annual program planning workshops each April through July. And during these workshops, we assess our performance and determine the funding which needs to be allocated for our needs-based programs to ensure that our preservation objectives are met. Next slide, please. This slide shows our simplified funding priorities. So it's more complicated than this, but this kind of boils down all the statutes and all our planning documents into one funding priorities slide. Safety is our #1 priority, and it's a part of everything we do. Next, we seek to preserve the investments which have already been made in the transportation system. We carve out resources to ensure that 90% of bridges meet department standards, ensure that 80% of pavement meet department standards, and that we achieve 100% of our maintenance objectives. At the same time, we ensure that we're meeting our other statutorily required allocation requirements. So about a third of our state revenues that we get are statutorily required allocations, and they go to those various programs. Essentially, what is left over after we hit those priorities is available for capacity improvements or discretionary work. Next slide, please. The case study focused on how we have formalized preservation of our assets as a guiding principle. There's a clear commitment by the department to fund preservation activities before other transportation priorities. Our transportation asset management plan simply documents this long-standing approach that we have taken. The case study also talks about how revenues are projected and the formal revenue estimating conference process, which is in place in Florida. It also addresses some of the funding uncertainties that we have experienced. Next slide, please. So our largest source of revenue is from fuel taxes. We also receive motor vehicle fees, tag and title fees, a portion of documentary stamp taxes, and we receive tolls which support the turnpike and other toll facilities. We have a 5-year work program of projects, and we operate on a cash flow of commitment basis. So I'll get into that a little bit more here. We have independent finance plans. Oh, back to that other one. Thank you, Lori. We have an independent finance plan that's done in my office, and we also have a cash forecast, which is done in another office within the department. And those two plans, we estimate how projects in the work program are going to flow. That is how the work on the project will progress, and then in turn, when and how much of the projects we will have to pay out to the contractor. We match the anticipated payments, the payments that we're going to have to make, with the projected revenues that we expect to receive to ensure that we have a finance plan and a cash forecast which are balanced to our anticipated revenues. So essentially, we use the revenues which are collected today to pay for work which began in prior years, essentially. When revenues grow above what was projected, everything's great. However, when revenues come in below the projections, that's when we have the challenges. And our guiding principles were certainly challenged during COVID. During that time, in 2021, we were faced with a sudden drop in revenue, and to the tune of $430 million less revenue in fiscal year 21 alone. And then we also had reduced revenue projections of $1.5 billion through the 5-year work program period. To balance our work program to the lower projected revenues, it was necessary for us to defer or delete 77 projects. However, we did not negatively impact any preservation-related projects. This was our most serious challenge to our preservation principles, and I'll get into that a little bit more detail later in the presentation. The end of a federal transportation act always brings with it some uncertainty. We try to build a 5-year work program which is reasonable. However, this is difficult when we don't know what the federal funding picture looks like in the outer years of the 5-year plan. And we also have had hurricanes and flooding which present funding challenges. Next slide, please. To manage funding risk, we focus on preservation of our assets. We have a process for formally projecting revenues as well as funding expected to be needed to adequately preserve our assets, and we have strategies for mitigating the uncertainties. Next slide, please. First, I'll talk about pavement preservation, so the resurfacing side of the picture. We have a statutory requirement that 80% of pavement on the state highway system meets department standards. We conduct a pavement condition survey every year so that we know what the actual condition is, and we know those pavements that are deficient. We set a target number of lane miles for each district to resurface each year. And then we provide each district with a fund allocation, which enables them to achieve the resurfacing lane mile target. We've modified the specifics on how we address this over the years. We went from giving each district the actual amount that they programmed for each resurfacing project, and truly gave them the amount that they had programmed. That caused some problems with disrupting the remainder of the program. And then we've recently moved to estimating just a general cost per lane mile, and we give an allocation out for a standard resurfacing lane mile, give that allocation to the districts, and then they need to use those resources to accomplish the targeted lane miles. If they're able to do the work for less than what we gave them, then they get the remainder to use how they want it. If it costs them more to do the work, then they need to dig into their discretionary allocations and accomplish those resurfacing targets with their discretionary funds. So at the time this case study was done and that this TAMP was provided, our pavement condition was in excellent shape. It was over 90% of pavement on the state highway system was meeting department standards, and we were actually getting criticized for over preserving the system, that we had it in, that we were investing possibly too much money on preservation. And so, we weren't optimizing the lifespan of the pavement. So we took a close look at that, and we reduced the number of lane miles to be resurfaced each year to bring the percentage down to the more optimal level of 80%. And that allowed some additional resources to be available for capacity projects. Next slide, please. Concerning bridges, we have a statutory requirement that 90% of bridges meet department standards. Of course, we ensure that all bridges that are open to traffic are safe for travel. We inspect all bridges in the state at least once every 2 years. So that's state-owned as well as locally owned bridges. We allocate resources for routine bridge repair work and examine those allocations annually. So we look at the inventory of bridges in each district and the deck area, and we come up with an amount per district for routine repair work. And then if more is needed to address the routine repairs, then we make funding adjustments. We also have policies concerning more substantial repairs and the replacement of bridges. If the engineers recommend extensive repairs, we present these recommendations to our executive team during the annual program planning workshops, and we carve out the funding to cover the repairs. If a replacement of the bridge is needed, then we program the bridge for replacement in the 6th year, which is the new 5th year of the next work program cycle. Since bridges are so expensive, the policy of programming the bridge replacements in the new 5th year really helps us plan financially for the bridge work. Of course, if the bridge can't make it, that long, then we will address it earlier. But we try to stay on top of that with our inspections and plan out when when the bridge is deteriorating, so that we can maximize the life cycle on it and effectively plan for the replacement of those bridges. Next slide, please. We look at both the projected costs as well as the resources side that are available to cover the costs. So we have a state revenue estimating conference that they take place about 2 to 3 times a year, and it's a formal consensus estimating conference. So there's 4 analysts that make projections of our various revenues that we have, and then the principals on the conference, who there's only one DOT person. One DOT person makes a projection, and then the other ones are from Department of Revenue. There's one from the governor's office, and there's one from the legislature, the House and Senate, that makes a projection. And then there's 4 principals on the conference that are, none of them are from the department, and they consider the projections from each analyst, and then they pick one or they pick a combination of the projections, and that's the official revenue forecast that we need to abide by, and that all agencies for other revenues have to abide by those projections. We update our estimates for projects which are included in our 5-year work program annually. We also have inflation factors which are applied to the estimated present day cost to ensure that we have adequate resources allocated for each project. Of course, you know, the inflation that we've been experiencing recently has exceeded those inflation factors that we had built into the work program. There are also monthly executive performance reviews where progress toward the letting plan is examined, and it's during this meeting that bids are examined as to whether they're coming in above or below or at the official estimate. We're fortunate that the state gas tax is indexed annually to the consumer price index. This last January, it increased 1.3 cents per gallon, which is barely noticeable, but that was one of the larger annual increases that we have seen. The impact to our annual revenues is substantial with the indexing. We receive about $985 million more per year in state gas taxes than we would if the gas tax had not been indexed. And we started indexing in 1997. The proceeds from the gas tax and other transportation-related taxes and fees are deposited into the State Transportation Trust Fund, and that is dedicated for transportation purposes. As a result of this, we generally are not having to compete with other state needs. And part of having a trust fund is that we know the resources deposited into the trust fund are to be used for transportation, and we must balance our 5-year work program to the anticipated revenues that we are projected to receive. Next slide, please. Like all states, we've had and we continue to have issues which present challenges for us in delivering the work program. COVID was by far the most significant challenge, and as I noted earlier, we had a sudden drop of revenue of $430 million in 1 year, and new revenue projection, which was $1.5 billion lower than the prior projection for the 5-year work program. We were at risk of having to place a hold on existing construction contracts. However, Governor DeSantis signed an executive order which suspended some of our statutory allocation requirements, and this provided us with the flexibility needed to stabilize and balance our work program without affecting preservation projects and without impacting regular construction projects, which were already underway. We've had numerous other challenges to our program: hurricanes, flooding, wildfires. We have and we continue to experience cost increases and supply chain disruptions, as well as unfunded mandates. However, during all these challenges, we've been able to stay true to our guiding principles of ensuring preservation activities are funded first. Next slide, please. The guiding principle of funding preservation first is certainly ingrained in our actions. Everyone in the department knows that safety is our top priority and is a part of everything we do. Department leadership certainly emphasizes this. We're constantly working to improve and reduce funding and uncertainty. We have a materials lab that does a great job of testing and research on the transportation system. For example, they're doing research on the effects of tides on bridge supports. Concerning pavement condition, they're constantly looking to improve the life of our pavements. We have a segment of road between Gainesville and Jacksonville that we call our test track. It's essentially 3 2-lane roads where one of the 2-lane roads contains different pavement types and electronic monitors to help provide data on pavement under live conditions. If a portion of the test section fails or is under construction, traffic can easily be diverted to the 3rd 2-lane segment. Next slide, please. To summarize, we have a clear prioritization process where safety and preservation of our assets are the top priorities. We have a formalized, consensus-based revenue estimating conference process that has worked well for us. We continue to try and reduce the risk of funding uncertainty. However, our prioritization process of preservation first is clear and has been consistently applied. It's never easy to defer a project. However, there's clear logic in the department's approach, and if a project does need to be deferred, we can clearly lay out the reasons why that project needs to be deferred and how that project fits within our funding priorities. Next slide, please. These are some of our next steps and challenges. We have plenty of challenges. Resurfacing on frontage roads is one of them. Frontage roads have not been officially counted in our pavement condition survey, but they have been addressed at the same time as the main line is being resurfaced. We're moving frontage roads officially onto the system, and those will be included in the pavement condition survey and considered independently. So they will have their own rating here in the near future. Technology and data have benefited our resurfacing program. We recently purchased a 3D pavement data collection system. This primarily impacted the way that we rate the cracking aspect of pavement condition. We can now do the whole pavement condition survey data collection in-house without the need for outside assistance. And then our folks, our IT folks have created a Power BI dashboard, which has been a huge help in identifying sections of pavement which are in need of resurfacing, as well as tracking the progress of completion of the pavement condition survey. Concerning the economy replacement of bridges, we continue to improve the process of analyzing and programming larger bridges for economy replacement. We identify bridges that are predicted to move from an NBI substructure rating of 5 to a 4. And the districts review the list of bridges and closely analyze their maintenance needs and their life cycle costs. And then they prioritize this list. And then they closely analyze those costs. And while our bridges are in excellent shape, we have over 800 bridges which are now over 65 years old. We also have over 1,200 bridges which were constructed in the 1960s and will likely be experiencing significant repair costs or be in need of replacement around the same time. So we're keenly aware of that, and we're trying to make sure that we have a good plan of action for those. We're constantly making improvements to our pavement performance monitoring to improve our pavement condition projections, and research is always underway, and we're continually looking for ways to extend the useful life of our roads, and the test track is just one example of this. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Dan. So if folks have questions, please do enter them in the chat. Just to get us started, I'd like to ask about Florida's commitment to preservation first. I mean, I think it's really compelling. It's fantastic. One thing we saw in doing the research, though, was that it's not something that just appeared overnight. It was the product of a lot of work between FDOT and the legislature. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that evolution of how you got to this spot where preservation first is a firm commitment, and what other states that don't have that enshrined in law could do to move in that direction.
Certainly. It happened long before I got with the department, and I've been here for over 30 years. I believe it was in the 1980s where we experienced the department had some financial troubles, and really made a commitment to preservation first, and that's how we were operating. And then some of the folks in the department at the time drafted language for a bill that was passed in the legislature, and our practice essentially got codified into law. So that has helped, because there have been challenges to it in the past, and it's really hard to cut capacity projects. And nobody ever celebrates the resurfacing of a road. You know, they want to cut a ribbon and celebrate a new road being open to traffic. So it's hard to maintain that priority, but it's in the statutes now, and it's part of our Florida transportation plan. Our leadership has embraced it, and they make that clear to the legislature, you know, in their regular conversations. So it's tough once you get away from it. It's hard to come back to it, but unfortunately, we haven't deviated from it, you know, yet, and we've certainly had some challenges.
Another question for you, and maybe for Lina and Brad. Brad mentioned this idea that now with the federal funding, there's a lot of discretionary grants, and that's a good thing, but it also creates more uncertainty. In FDOT, how have you accounted for that funding? Have you estimated what you might get from grants, or do you just sort of treat it as found money?
Yeah, no, we do not assume that we're going to get any discretionary grants. We try to go for them, but they do take a while. And our secretary testified before Congress about that, and the desire to have more formula funding. We certainly would prefer to have formula funding. We can plan for it a little bit better.
Yeah, and what we've done for the discretionary grants is we're really only submitting applications for anything that's already in our 5-year program. And if we get money, great, and it goes to being able to do other projects, we'll go to that project, but then it frees up money to be able to do other projects. Especially in times of over programming, that's really just what we had to do.
Great. And then going back to Dan, you mentioned that going forward, you're going to be including frontage roads and in your asset management program, and certainly there's a lot of them in Florida, probably in a lot of states. Do you see, or have you made any estimate of what the impact might be on needs as a result of that? Or is that to come after you've actually got data?
No, yeah, we've looked at them, and we're comfortable that it's not a significant deviation from our current pavement condition. In the past, when we provided the funding, when we provided the fund allocation to the districts to resurface their lane miles, they would include the frontage roads in the total project for the mainline work. So they were just getting a increased allocation. But now that we've moved to giving them a standard cost per lane mile allocation, they're not going to get that amount for any frontage road work that may be needed. So we need to bring those frontage roads onto the system so they get both credit for the lane mile work that they're doing, as well as the fund allocation now, which is going to be available for that work. But yeah, that was something that we were concerned about. We didn't want to. We had dropped our pavement condition down close to 80% meeting department standards, so we were right on that threshold of dropping below the 80, and we wanted to make sure that we stayed above, and we didn't want to just bring on a bunch of frontage roads without knowing what their condition was to drop us below that number.
Yeah, and similar question for Michigan. You mentioned that you're trying to incorporate culvert data into your asset management program. Does that end up having a revenue impact on your well, basically on the cost side, what you need, or is it revenue neutral in that you're dealing with culverts, you just don't have as much data now?
I think a little bit of both. We do have a ancillary assets program amount in our investment strategy. But now that we're collecting all this great data about the culverts and all the assets that we have, we realize that the number that we have kind of bookmarked for that. It's probably insufficient. And so they're actually using the data to be able to make a request to the process that we have here for asking for additional revenues to support those assets. So yeah, I mean, we had a little bit in there already, but this is definitely helping us to project out what we're going to need in the future.
And a question for both states is I know that inflation has certainly been huge, and Dan, you mentioned supply chain disruptions, which were huge in the midst of the pandemic. Are you seeing continuing impacts from inflation and supply chain, or do you feel like that's in the rearview mirror at this point?
No, we're still seeing increased costs, and that we do believe that the last few months, the actual bids that we're getting are more in line with what our estimates are. So I think they're still going up, but we're doing a better job of projecting what those are going to be. So our expectations are more in line with reality now. And I am hearing about, I'm not as involved in the supply chain, what the reasons are for those cost increases, but I believe that's still an issue. And I've heard that the location of the projects throughout the state matters with getting the supplies and the materials to the projects.
I'd say the same here. I mean, I feel like we're doing a better job at knowing that the inflation's going to kind of stick around for a little while, and our engineers' estimates are pretty in line. At least that's what I heard earlier this week. So yeah, I think what Dan said, and we have the same kind of issue with the Michigan being a pretty long state when you think about the whole Upper Peninsula and just how far some of these contractors have to go to do some of the work. And we try to consider that resource allocation and all that when we're making our program. So.
Great. Going back to Dan, you mentioned some of the things that compete for funding and some of the events that have cropped up. I know in Florida that hurricanes are always a hazard. When you have natural hazards like hurricanes, is that something that crowds out, that demands funding that takes away from asset preservation, or how do you manage those kinds of events?
We take care of the infrastructure right away. We're like one of our district secretaries recently said that we get out there before the first responders. The department gets out there and clears. And I really never thought about it that way, but they have to clear the roads and get the trees cut and tossed to the side and allow the first responders to get in there. And, so we do whatever it takes, and we mobilize through the 7 districts that we have. We were hit with a couple of hurricanes the last 2 years that hit District 2 and our District 1 that were substantial damage, and all the other districts really mobilized and came to help those areas. And then there was a bridge that was hit down in Sanibel Island, which was a local bridge, but the bridge was fine. The bridge didn't sustain any damage, but the approaches to the bridge got totally washed out. And the department was able to work with the local government and others to restore access to that island pretty quickly. I can't remember how quickly it happened, but it was really fast how they did it, and just kind of helped out that local government. So it's all hands on deck when something like that happens, and we take care of those. And then if we can get reimbursed from FEMA or from FHWA, then we seek reimbursement for that, but we adjust our program accordingly.
And say in Michigan, it's pretty consistent as well. We've had quite a few share of our extreme weather events over the last decade that has hit all parts of the state, from tornadoes within a 2-week time frame last year that went across. One of them went right along I-96 and completely destroyed all the trees and everything all around there that our people were out there for over a week clearing out the freeway to get that back out on operations for everyone. We've had dam failures, which flooded out the city of Midland. We've had other infrastructure that as a result of extreme weather. So same story as what Dan's saying in Michigan. We're out there, we're pulling our resources together to get everything back up and running.
Thanks. Question for Lina and Brad. You know, one reason we were excited to have Michigan as a case study in the FHWA research is that your TAMP actually does feature different investment strategies and what will happen as a result of the investment level. And you know, some TAMPs do that, but yours does a very nice job of that. And question I had, and you presented on that a little bit when you spoke, Lina. Question I have for you is, how is that information received by stakeholders within Michigan? Does it help set expectations, or is there any negative effect of showing all these different investment levels and different results, or you know, how has it played out internally within Michigan to show that sort of information?
Yeah, I don't know that we've had any sort of real negative reception to it. I think it's kind of like data, you know, like this is what you get for this amount of money and this is what you get for this amount. And we try to use it to communicate the gap that we have between where we want to be and where the feds want us to be and where our state transportation commission wants us to be and where we can actually get. So I think it's just a matter of presenting the information. I mean, as I kind of say this sometimes, you know, as public servants, like we're here to like use the resources efficiently and provide the data that supports the decision making. So to me, it's just another way that we can communicate what our needs are. The TAMP was, you know, focused in 2022 on our national highway system. And we hope to expand that in future years to go beyond that. So it's our entire network. You know, I guess that would be ideal. So we can have a document that communicates statewide what our needs are, including all the agencies, even that Brad mentioned, because it's really just a subset of them right now. But there's a lot that we could do to improve and expand on the TAM, but we just kind of see it as another way to communicate the needs.
Great. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming in on the TAM or on the different presentations. So well, I do want to, as Lori noted in the chat, remind everybody to join us on June 25th for part 2 of this mini series, where we talk about organizational risk management. And Applied Pavement Technology, who led the FHWA research effort, was the prime contractor on the effort for FHWA, will be facilitating that one. And Lori has put the link for that registration in the chat. So want to thank Dan and Lina and Brad again for presenting and sharing their perspectives. I want to encourage everybody to go to FHWA's asset management website and download the different products of the research to get more information on the case studies that were presented today, or on the different strategies for managing financial and organizational risk. And I want to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar, and really appreciate your taking the time to join us. And with that, wish everybody a great day and close out the webinar. Thank you.